It's so good to be here today, Francine.
Hi, Flavia. Thank you.
Of course. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So that's always the hard question, right? I am a Jamaican immigrant to the US. My family moved, the whole family moved when I was 17.
Oh, wow.
In terms of professions, I've had a few, but right now I am a licensed clinical professional counselor. So I'm a psychotherapist. I am also a mom. I have a 21-year-old and almost she'll be 17 soon in a couple days. 17-year-old daughter. Yeah, and I've lived in a couple places in the US. So right now I live in Chicago and I don't like the cold. That's something I can tell you about myself. I'm not a fan of winter.
And Chicago is especially brutal. It's not a normal level of cold.
It's not a normal level of cold. My ex-husband told me it was just like New York because I was living in New York before I moved here. It's not just like New York.
They have a breeze that just cuts through all pieces of clothes that you have to right to your bone.
Yeah. And I'm 5 feet tall and just over 100 pounds. So when that breeze hits, you see me like plant my feet and make sure I don't get blown away. I'm a yoga instructor. I've been a yoga instructor for 18 years now. I'm actually right now doing a training in yoga therapy. And so the work that I do is very much in keeping with the person that I am. So I'm a psychotherapist, but I do therapy that includes the body. So I'm a somatic psychotherapist. What else? I'm a meditator. I meditate. I am a yoga instructor, but I try to have a regular yoga practice as much as I can. I'm an Aries, so regularity is not something that we we find easily. What else about me? I actually volunteer also for an organization called Expanding Lives that brings young women from West Africa every summer. 3 young women from Niger and 4 young women usually from Niger. And I teach them yoga and pelvic health. So pelvic health is another curiosity of mine, women's pelvic health. So I volunteer with them, and I also volunteer with a women's collective, a women's health collective in Chicago called Chicago Women's Health Center. And so I do supervision for the counseling interns there, the therapy interns there, and consultation for them. And then I also teach. Yeah, I didn't talk about that. So I teach, I do workshops and presentations on somatic psychotherapy. I actually have recently done a few workshops for therapists in Jamaica. And we met at the Caribbean Conference on Psychology. Yeah. So that's really fun. I really enjoy teaching about the work that I do because I think the things that I've really been blessed to have amazing teachers, spiritual teachers, and professional teachers and mentors throughout my lifetime. And so being able to share that information just has helped me to transform as a human, and being able to share that with other people is really very fulfilling to me. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing so much of yourself already with us. I am super excited to ask you more about your journey, kind of when you came to the States and how it is that you've transformed into the person that you are today. When you came, you actually had to go home for your health.
We got the notice that we had something like 90 days, right, to fulfill our arriving in the US on our resident visa. And I remember, Flavia, it was December 26th. And I mentioned before, I don't like cold. And I think this is part of why. So back in those days, the families would bring coats and everything, and they could meet you right there in the airport. And I remember somebody opening the door and the wind rushed through, and I had never felt that kind of cold before. And I remember, even though immigration, right, customs and immigration is never a good experience, my head involuntarily turned back towards the door that we had come from. And the next day I woke up and put on, my crew socks and my sweatshirt and my back then ribbed tights were a thing, and that came back obviously. But got all dressed because it was sunny outside. It had been snowing the night before, and I walked outside. And little did I know what 20 degrees felt like. And I remember looking up at the sun and thinking that the sun had betrayed me. I was 17 when we moved and applied to colleges. I didn't know anything about the places that I was applying to. My aunt had gotten me a bunch of applications, and I just filled them out, wrote the essays, sent everything off. And I figured wherever I got in, then I would, have to make the decision. And I got into 5 of the 6 colleges. So I picked one based on, I went into the Barron's. We had the big, thick Barron's book that rated all the colleges. And one of them was in the most competitive category. And as a Caribbean person, I was like, oh, okay. If I got into a most competitive school, I should go there.
You wanting the best. The best.
Of course. You must go to the one, the one that was the hardest to get into means it's the best. Mm. And I mean, granted, it was an excellent school, but it was a little school, 2,000 students in the middle of Western Massachusetts, and mostly white. I think there were 3 Caribbean students and 3 Jamaican students, and the other 2 were seniors. So they were leaving. So the only people that looked like me were the other Black students, and most of them African American, right? So I tried to fit in with the African American students as best I could, and realized very quickly that I didn't understand the culture. So here I was trying to fit in with the people that looked like me. I didn't really understand the culture. I was a very naive 17 because I had gone to an all-girls Catholic high school. I was a country girl. I grew up on a farm in the country. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school in Kingston. And here I am in this college, all by myself. And I tried my best to adapt, but it was a struggle. And I didn't even realize back then how much I was struggling, I don't think. I was fortunate, because I met people who were supportive. I put on a tough facade, that my dance professor told me that some of the upperclassmen, some of the Black upperclassmen came and said, you're going to really like this new freshman from Jamaica. She's pretty tough. But that was the facade, because I couldn't let anybody see really how scared I was. I couldn't even acknowledge to myself how scared I was. So 2 years, second year, my first semester I had a 2.7 GPA. My father looked at it and he said, well, I suppose this is harder than anything that you've had to do before. And I was crushed, right? Mm-hmm. But that just goes to show you, I thought I was going to be pre-med. I got a C in the bio class because I skipped intro, and went right for the 200 level course. Anyway, the second year, as I mentioned to you, I walked into the snack bar one day and I looked around, and all of the white men looked like the same person to me, and all of the white women looked like the same person to me. And it only lasted for a flash, but I thought, I'm losing my mind. I have to get out of here. It was scary. I had a thought of, it was sophomore year, so people were applying for study abroad. And I had a thought of, what if I go back to Jamaica for a year? It just seemed like it was a flight response. I'm a trauma therapist, So it was a flight response, but it was also intuitive. I had a sense that I didn't really know who I was. And so if I went home, maybe there would be an opportunity to figure that out. So I did. I took the year off. I went to my parents were really worried that I was going to drop out of college and never go back. And so I had to promise them that this was a year off and I was going to go back.
What is best on paper may not be what is best for you.
For you, yes.
So that's the first thing that I wanted to comment on. The second thing I want to comment on is just because you look like someone or even come from the same place doesn't automatically mean that you will be able to relate to the person.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, it takes time for them to realize that. The third thing that I want to mention is this grades thing. A lot of people who come to the States for college, especially coming from a competitive Caribbean environment, don't expect to do poorly.
No.
And so when they're hit with that first grade, it's really like a shock going through their system.
Yeah.
If the grade is bad. And then the fourth thing, which I think I hear across the age spectrum, is people often don't know how poorly they are doing until they come out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's hard really to have a pulse on yourself when you're down.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you sharing these elements of your story because they are going to ring true for many people who are listening to this.
One of the things that I realized was that I didn't know how to ask for help, but I didn't realize that until afterwards, because it was, to me, it was, I always got good grades. I didn't even have to work hard at it. And so the fact that I wasn't doing well and potentially would have to ask for help was shameful to me. I was actually really embarrassed at not being able to do it on my own. And it wasn't until afterwards that I realized that everyone was going for tutoring. Everyone was going to try to get help with their problem sets. It was a different culture. It wasn't like not knowing was problematic in any way. It was sort of expected that you go and get help, but I didn't know how to do that. And I was embarrassed for needing it. And forget mental health help. That didn't come until much, much later. I'm just talking about academic help. I didn't even know. I felt embarrassed to need that. Because, here being the only of any kind in a setting also can be so hard, right? Because you don't want to be shown up. I got lots of scholarships to go to this very expensive, very elite school. And I didn't want to be revealed as they made a mistake, right? So it's the imposter syndrome that was at work there as well.
Absolutely. So you went home?
Yeah. I went to Jamaica. I stayed with my aunt, cousins, my aunts, older cousins. And I really was able to land in a different sense of myself, right? I think if I had gone to UWI just right out of high school, it would not have been the same experience for me. I was able to grow up because, I was mostly independent. I was staying with my aunt, but I had to register at UWI all on my own. I was paying for it on my own from my summer job. So, I landed in myself and in an identity as a Caribbean person and a woman. And I went back with a different sense of me. The dance studio was a safe space for me. Dancing was a safe outlet for me. And I think in hindsight now, as a somatic therapist, movement really helped because I was prone to depression. And so having that as a regular part of my routine, I think really helped with my mental health as well. I loved spending time with the Black students that I knew and adding this international group, this sort of more, I guess now we would say BIPOC, right? But this broader group of people also helped me to be I could be different amongst a bunch of different people, And so there was something that was also very settling about that. I wasn't, because even with the Black students, I was still the only one, right? So you got this school full of white students where you're one of very few people of color. And then even with the African American students, I was the only Jamaican often in that group, the only Caribbean person. And so there was something about this group of onlys, right? That just felt really, settling is the word that I would use. Oh, like more expansive and also settling.
You're finding and creating a new home for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's even more than that. I think it was, I don't know if home feels quite right or just, something about that is not quite right, but also right.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't so much feel like home as like, it's just something about expansiveness. It was expansive. There was a more open sense of like, we were all different, so we could all be different. And there wasn't any expectation. There wasn't any expectation that I would understand them culturally because we were all different.
What a beautiful thing to be able to have your curiosity celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
And not shut down in any way, whether perceived, whether like consciously or unconsciously shut down.
Right. To not feel like I was supposed to know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that was the hard part, was like, I didn't know a lot of African American history, or I didn't know a lot about the culture. There was an experience of going into the snack bar like the first week of school, and they had watermelon. And I was so excited, right? Because I hadn't seen watermelon in like a year. And I got excited, and the person behind me said, "Don't do that." And I was like, "What am I doing?" And he said, "I'll explain to you later." And he was like, the stigma of African Americans and watermelon, right? And so he was like, don't feed into that stigma, the stereotype. I mean, not the stigma, the stereotype. I didn't even know that was like once he brought it to my attention, I was like, oh, but it wouldn't have been the first thing that was front of mind for me, because we don't have any issues around watermelon. So it was little things like that, of like things that I thought I should know. How would I have known?
How would you have
that's
known?
the thing that I would again say to my younger self. Like, there is no way for you to know this. So you get to learn, but you don't have to feel foolish or stupid for not knowing.
Mm. What a nice way to end our time together today. Thank you for sharing your experience and the wisdom that your experience has taught you.